After an embarrassing 2023 NFL season, the Carolina Panthers are looking to rebound into the 2024 season. And after a pretty impressive offseason, all things considered, I think the Carolina Panthers have a chance to be much improved heading into 2024. So I know the number one question you're asking is, well, Metro, by improvement, how much are we talking? Well, I'll talk about that in the very end of the video, but I like a lot of what they did in the offseason. Let me explain. For starters, before I get to any explanation, I think there's an obvious elephant in the room we have to address. Bryce Young has to be better next year. And I know Bryce Young struggled last year as he was honestly pretty disappointing. Struggled to hit 11 passing touchdowns, had a QBR of 33.4, only 2,877 total yards, and for the most part had a pretty unsuccessful rookie year. But I think the question then becomes, how much do we put the blame on Bryce Young and how much do we put the blame on the team around him? Because last year, it's very safe to say that the supporting cast around Bryce Young was very poor. From the coaching staff, to the players, to the offensive line, to the defense, to basically everything, this was a total mess of a team last year. But I think they've done a decent job of fixing a lot of their issues heading into the 2024 season. Now, heading into the offseason, they didn't really have a ton of salary cap space to just go out there and sign a bunch of big name guys. But with the available money, they made a lot of big time moves. Going out there and a lot of those moves were honestly really sharp moves in my opinion. I actually really like what they did. The biggest issue for this Panthers team last year was offensively they couldn't really get anything going because they had nobody who could create any sort of separation. So what did they do? Well, they went out there and took probably the best route runner available in Deontay Johnson, and they're not going to pair Deontay Johnson up with a very good and solid route runner in his own rights in Adam Thielen to go along with a very shifty wide receiver in Jonathan Mingo. And then of course they brought in the very talented Xavier Legette in the back end of the first round. I'll talk a little bit more about the draft class because I've heard a lot of negative complaints about their draft class, but I'll be honest with you, I thought they did a very decent job. The next thing I think they did a very good job of doing was they got the right guy in Dave Canales. If you go way back into my channel and look at all the videos I made about the head coaching hires, I talked very highly of Dave Canales, and I think I had him as either my number 1 or number 2 ranked hire of this entire coaching cycle. If Dave Canales can make Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield quality quarterbacks in this league, then well, what do you think he's going to do with Bryce Young? I think it's pretty safe to say that talent for talent, both Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield really don't compare to Bryce Young. Yes, I know Baker Mayfield was a former number 1 overall pick, and Geno Smith was also a very highly picked player in his own regard. But in comparison to Bryce Young through his entire career, none of those guys really compare to Bryce Young as a pure talented player. No, does he have the strongest arm? Not really, but when it comes to the processing of the game, his ability to navigate the pocket, his ability to throw an accurate ball, Bryce Young has all that. It was just that last year, a lot of people didn't really get to see what we know Bryce Young can be because his number 1 wide receiver was a 30-plus-year-old Adam Thielen, and his second wide receiver was a rookie in Jonathan Mingo. And they made it a big-time effort to surround him with as much offensive talent as possible, starting with getting him a good offensive play caller in Dave Canales. Again, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, both guys who weren't necessarily surrounded by a ton of talent, but were surrounded by enough talent to get the job done, and they had a lot of success. And one common theme that I've seen with all these teams that Dave Canales has been a part of is his wide receiving core consists of 2 similar body types. A big physical wide receiver like a DK Metcalf and a Mike Evans, and now with Carolina, hopefully an Xavier Legette. And they also pair them up with a more shifty wide receiver in what was once Tyler Lockett and what was once Chris Godwin to now add a shifty wide receiver in Deontay Johnson and in some ways Adam Thielen. I'm not saying Xavier Legette's going to be even close to what Mike Evans or DK Metcalf have become, but if he can be even 50% of Mike Evans, then I think they'll definitely take that. Not to mention Deontay Johnson, who yes, does have some struggles with his hands, is one of the best route runners out there and knows how to get separation. So for a team that last year was struggling to find wide receivers with separation, you now get a guy in Deontay Johnson who could be a very reliable target for Bryce Young to target. And when there's not any big time plays open, you can just throw it up to Xavier Legette, who has the big frame similar to Mike Evans and DK Metcalf, to go out there and make some big time explosive plays. I think what Dave Canales is going to do is probably something very similar to what he did in Tampa Bay, and I think if he runs a very similar offense, I think you're going to see a lot more success in Carolina. Looking on the defensive side of things, I do still think there's a lot of issues with this defense. I think going out there and getting an edge rusher should be a top priority for them looking towards next year. Ashawn Robinson is one of your starters right now. DJ Wanham is your other starter, who is a very good player in his own rights. And then Jadeveon Clowney are your kind of best pass rushing options right now. And then of course you have the very good Derrick Brown up the middle. And no, I don't really blame blame this team for getting rid of Brian Burns. I thought he was a little bit of an overrated player who's going to get way overpaid. That's not to say he's a bad player per se, it's just that I wouldn't have given him the money that he wanted. So yes, they should have traded him a few years ago to the Rams for the 2 first-round picks, but they got the most out of it, and it ended up being going towards a pretty good cause with who they ended up taking in the second round. Looking at the rest of the defense before we start talking a little bit more in depth about this draft class, taking a guy like Dane Jackson, who is one of my top-ranked cornerbacks available in free agency, made a lot of sense. In Buffalo, he was a super underrated, both slot, inside, and outside corner who can do a bit of everything. That secondary with guys like J.C. Horn, Troy Hill, Deshaun Jameson, and now Dane Jackson could actually be a pretty solid quadruplet of corners. And then, of course, your safety room is Jordan Fuller and Xavier Woods. I'm not really a big fan of Xavier Woods. I've made that pretty clear on this channel, but he gets the job done, I suppose. I also want to give credit for their linebacking room. It's actually a very solid unit. Shaq Thompson, Josie Jewell, while maybe not special, could be a good unit on the right defense, so I'm excited to see what they can do on this defense next year. But okay, I've talked enough about these certain pieces that we've already known are on this roster. Let's actually talk about their draft. And I want to make it very clear, I think they did a very solid job with what they were available to do in this year's draft. They had one pick in every single round. They decided to trade up into the back end of the first round, which probably was the smart move, but they decided to do it anyways. They took Xavier Legette, who, yes, is a little bit rough with his route tree right now, but if he can develop a couple different moves, I don't see a reason why he can't be a good receiver on this team. It's not like somebody at his frame really needs to get a ton of separation. As long as he can get about half a yard, he's going to be totally fine. It's more about Bryce Young just putting the ball in the right place at the right time for his big physical wide receiver to make the big plays. Then they added Jonathan Brooks to add him to what is already a pretty solid running back room with Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. Obviously, Miles Sanders was a big time disappointment last year, but Chuba Hubbard was kind of a bright spot for this team. You now bring in a very talented running back in Jonathan Brooks, who, had he not torn his ACL, we're talking about potentially a first-round pick. There were several teams in the draft that I really wanted to see Jonathan Brooks go to, and Carolina was one of those teams because I think he can thrive with what is becoming a very improved offensive line. When you look at this offensive line, I kind of think it's a little bit underrated. Taylor Moton at right tackle was very solid last year. They brought in 2 new guards in Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt being the better of the two. Your center position is still a big-time question mark. Right now, Austin Corbett is technically your starter. We'll have to wait and see if that ends up holding up. I kind of wouldn't mind seeing if Chandler Zavala can maybe play center, but we'll have to wait to see on that one. And then your left tackle, you're hoping that Ike Mekwonu could be what he was in his rookie year, hopefully even take a step forward, because he didn't really look that good last year, and if he can look like he did his rookie year and take a step forward from that, hopefully that's what he can get out of him in that left tackle position. But going back to Jonathan Brooks, again, had he been healthy, we're talking about potentially a late first round pick. I don't really know a good comparison for Jonathan Brooks because he doesn't really play similarly to a lot of the big time stars you see, like a Christian McCaffrey or a Saquon Barkley, but think of him kind of like a discount version of Le'Veon Bell, just maybe not as patient and as elusive. He's a very patient running back who, when he finds the hole, is going to hit it and is going to make guys miss. And he may not have the breakaway speed as some of the great running backs have, but he definitely has enough to get the job done. Hopefully he does come back from his ACL injury 100% okay and looks like the same guy that I saw down there in Texas, because in Texas he was one of the biggest reasons why they were so dominant last year in the college football landscape. Then in the third round they took Trevin Wallace, a linebacker from Kentucky. I have mixed feelings about this pick. I don't hate the pick. I don't necessarily love the pick. I think there's better linebacker prospects available, but I do think Trevin Wallace could provide some level of special teams play and maybe at some point could be a starting linebacker for this team. A solid linebacker who needs to learn a little bit more about contact balance and getting off blocks, but I think he has a little bit of upside in the league. Then they took my guy, Jatavion Sanders, another Texas player. This guy I'm a bigger fan of than a lot of the other picks in this draft. I was shocked to see Jatavion Sanders fall into day 3. I thought he was a sure locked fire to go in the second round, and hell, if you look back at some of my mock drafts and if you look back to my last Carolina Panthers video, I had Jatavion Sanders going for them in the second round. Jatavion Sanders is going to be a very dynamic playmaker on this tight end room, which right now is kind of lacking in talent, maybe outside of a Tommy Tremble who only went for less than 200 yards last year. Yes, Jatavion Sanders has smaller arms, and yes, he might struggle to block a little bit. But in my opinion, you're not drafting Jatavion Sanders to be a run blocker or even be a pass blocker. You're using him as a weapon. Give him a screen and he's going to take it to the house. Or give him a streak right up the middle into the seams. He's going to make the plays. He's got very strong hands. He's very good after the catch. A underrated athlete. Yes, he might run like a 4.6, but who cares? He can run like an NFL player in the NFL. Is he a George Kittle? No. If I had to make a comparison to him, think of him kind of like a Delaney Walker. A little bit undersized and never really a great blocker, but a very good pass catcher who can easily get you a couple 1,000-yard seasons. To end the draft, I didn't really care for their 6th and 7th round pick, but Shaw Smith-Wade out of Washington State was somebody who I think could be a developmental prospect in that secondary. It's kind of difficult to say right now that he'll ever be a starter. He'll probably be starting on special teams, and if he can make enough impact there, maybe he could get some reps as a potential cornerback on this roster. Again, Dane Jackson, J.C. Horn will be your 2 starters. You really could use some backups there. I don't hate Deshaun Jamison and Troy Hill, Deshaun Jamison being more of your special teams guy. So hopefully a guy like a Shaw Smith-Wade could be that future starter or even backup on this team. But alright, I've talked about the roster, I talked about why I like it, I've talked about why I like the head coach, the quarterback. What's the upside for this team next year? I don't think it's a very high upside. I don't think this team's going to win 7+ games. I think it's more than likely going to be maybe a 6-7 win season, have another good draft, add some pass rushers, add some corners, add some maybe another weapon for this offense, and then I think you're heading into 2025 looking pretty sharp and hopefully going to have a chance to make a playoff spot. I think if Bryce Young can be the guy that he was drafted to be with the #1 overall pick, we're talking about a team that could be very competitive next year. If this team has a bad year though, I think you might have a lot more questions about your starting quarterback than what I think they do right now. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think as long as the young pieces end up working out, like an Xavier Legette, a Jatavion Sanders, and some of the pieces on the defense, if those pieces can work out, if Bryce Young can work out, if Dave Canales could be a good fit with Bryce, then I think this team does have some really solid upside to be potentially the 2nd best team in that division, I'll say. Maybe. At the end of the day, the Buccaneers lost their offensive coordinator. I don't think they'll be as good as they were last year. Probably still the 2nd best team on paper though. And then you have the Saints, who had a good draft in their own regards, but I still have a lot of questions about that roster. If Carolina can hit the right notes and can hit the right beats, maybe at best 2nd best team in this division behind Atlanta. But I think at worst you win 6-7 games next year and then you go into 2025 hoping to be the best team in the division. We'll just have to wait and see. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.